Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
The European Union and its eurozone may be coming apart at the seams.
Following Brexit, demand for a referenda to quit is growing in the Netherlands and in Italy. Switzerland has abandoned its application to join, and Greece may have to default. Spain and Portugal are facing sanctions from Brussels.
Where did it all go wrong? Dr. Russell Foster of King's College London is a considerable expert on the European project, and so we are considerably interested in what he has to say about the state Europe's in. And he joins us now. Dr. Russell, thanks for coming on board. Let's start with the Netherlands, which we all know well. What's the state of play there? What's the possibility of a referendum being held? And if it were, how would it go?
The state of the Netherlands is indicative of the state across Europe, of growing Euroscepticism and hostility not to the European idea, but to the specific institutions of the European Union. The possibility of an exit or a Dutch referendum on membership can't be ruled out, especially as we saw in April earlier this year, the referendum on the Netherlands Association Agreement with Ukraine, which was ostensibly a referendum about the Ukraine, but in reality was a referendum on Dutch opinion of the European Union, and it was a catastrophic defeat for the Europhilic parties. So there is a growing sense of Euroscepticism among the Dutch, as there is among the French, to a lesser degree among the Germans, but most substantially a growing Euroscepticism in the Mediterranean littoral nations, in Spain, in Greece, which obviously has been Eurosceptic for several years, and in Italy. And in the last couple of months, well, the last month, we've seen that Brexit has given a precedent, has been the first occasion, apart from Greenland in the 1980s, where a member state has withdrawn from the Union without dire economic consequences, at least in the immediate short term. And this will act as a rallying point for Dutch Eurosceptics, for German, for Danish, Swedish Eurosceptics to say, we can do it as well.
I couldn't have put that better myself, but I want to focus in on one of the first things that you said. I was a campaigner for Brexit, not because I'm against Europe. I love Europe. I hate the EU. That's a different thing. That put me in the same camp as some people who don't just hate the EU, but probably hate Europe and anyone that they think of as Johnny Foreigner, and that's an uncomfortable place to be. I wish we could rip it up and start again. And if we could, then we could all happily build a new European Union on a human basis. But if we have to take this European Union, I say no, and I think more and more people think like that. Wouldn't it be possible, therefore, if we could get a referendum in the Netherlands, in Italy, in Denmark and so on, and people started voting out, and then had this 2-year interregnum, at which point the European Union institutions might be prepared to say, well, this isn't working, we're going to have to try something new.
It's a nice thought. Now, unlike you, I was campaigning for Britain to remain in the European Union, that I'm aware that the EU has manifold problems, endless faults, but I thought that it was better than the alternative of not having a Europe. It would be a nice idea to be able to move on from the European Union to, as you say, a new European Union, one that is not predicated on an economic basis, but one which is built upon social trust and social institutions. I can't foresee that happening in the short-term or long-term future. The Brexit referendum revealed a deep hostility to the European project, not specifically the European Union, but broadly the European project. Now, the day after Brexit, we saw the former Belgian Prime Minister Guy Verhofstadt, who quite tellingly stated that this is a sign that people are not against the European idea, they're against the European Union. Now, the way I see it, the European Union and the European idea have become inextricable, that if the European Union goes, it takes the European idea with it. That the idea that we can dismantle the Union and create some sort of a new European Economic Community or some sort of looser alliance of European states, I can't really see that happening anytime in the future.
But why not? It was never intended that this should be an ever closer political union. It was never intended that it must encompass every single country in the European continent. And it certainly was never intended that the poorest countries in the European continent should lose all their population, especially their young population. More than half of all young Latvians are working somewhere else other than Latvia. And it seems to me that these are design faults that have crept into the whole business.
Well, the Union has many design faults which have been there since the early inceptions of the European coal and steel community. Now, the 3 points you raised there, the third one I cannot disagree with. It was never a plan for the Union to split between the richer industrial countries and the less wealthy Mediterranean or Eastern nations. But the first 2 points you raised on the Union was never meant to encompass all of Europe, and it was never meant to pursue ever closer union. I think that these have been a part of the European idea since 1945, that the European idea, whether it's the ECSC, the EEC, the EU, has always been built upon the idea of a manifest destiny, of Europe to be united.
Yeah, but they accepted the Cold War division of Europe. They didn't seek to recruit. They didn't seek to recruit the socialist countries of Eastern Europe into the European Union. They pretended they weren't in Europe.
Absolutely not. There were empty seats at the European Parliament for those European states which were still shackled behind the Iron Curtain. And once the curtain came down and the Berlin Wall came down, the European Union did extend its hand and invitations to Eastern European member states. So I think that the European Union its leaders and institutions have always desired to expand the Union across the whole of the continent. Now, the second point that
why not Russia then?
Russia's too big. Its economy is simply too vast. The European economies wouldn't be able to compete with a Russia within the Union. But this raises a very important point of where do we draw the boundary of Europe? Yeah. This is a question that keeps coming back when we talk about potential Turkish membership, when we saw the enlargements in 2004 and 2007 of where does Europe end, of who is European, who is not European, and significantly who should and should not be considered European. Now, the other point that you made there on ever closer union.
Political union.
Ever closer political union. This points to what for me is the fundamental design flaw of the European project from the late 1940s, that what worked for the European project in the mid-20th century is now an active hindrance to the EU in the 21st century. That the early institutions and the early leaders based further European integration upon the theory of neo-functionalism. The assumption that closer economic, financial ties would then spill over into closer political ties and political unions, which would then spill over into a social, a psychological union whereby people no longer thought of themselves as Portuguese or Bulgarian or Finns, but as Europeans. Now, to a small extent, that has happened with the wealthier city-dwelling elites in Europe who may have more in common with their peers in other cities than with their peers within the same country. But for the large numbers of Europeans who have been left behind by globalization, who have been left behind by the neoliberal project, this spillover has not happened, and people have not accepted this identity as European. Now, when this neo-functionalist doctrine was created in the late 1950s, it became taken up by the European institutions almost as a gospel of Jean Monnet, that further economic union will lead to further political union, will lead to continued peace. It hasn't happened. And a consequence of the European institutions continually following this dogma is that they have continued to place economic rationale ahead of social well-being. And since the beginning of the Great Recession and the credit crunch, we've seen the European Union's unelected technical experts who were doing a great job in the 1970s and the 1980s when the European Union was a distant economic entity. We've seen the same unelected experts implementing policies which make perfect economic sense, but without consideration of the social consequences that this has. And this points to what is for me the fundamental problem of the current EU. Not only its democratic deficit, but its emotional deficit. That it is still being run like a corporation, like it was in the 1960s and the 1970s, which was necessary. We can't put fishing quotas and trade agreements to the public vote because nothing would get done. So that was fine in the 20th century. But now when the EU's institutions start implementing austerity packages, when they start telling the Italian government that it can't bail out its failing banks for the third time, when it starts stating to Eastern European members that they may not fortify their borders against the migration crisis. These
and sanctioning Spain and Portugal
and sanctioning
for
Spain and
seeking
Portugal.
To throw off austerity measures.
Absolutely, and sanctioning the Mediterranean countries who have been hardest hit by austerity. What happens is that people will look at the EU's policies not as sound economic strategies, but as diktats being handed down by an unelected elite.
It's doomed then, isn't it, Doctor, as you describe it?
Yes, with a very long if. I think that the EU can be saved if 4 changes are made. The first one is that the EU needs to make significant reforms to make itself democratically accountable to the people. Since the introduction of the euro at the beginning of 2002, the European Union has changed from a distant economic entity that was concerned with tariffs and corporations into something that has a genuine impact on the everyday lives of 500 million people. That requires democratic accountability. The second one is that the EU should consider scaling back some of its powers, of not handing down diktats from Brussels. The third one is to abandon the outdated doctrine of neo-functionalism. Ernst Haas, who created neo-functionalism in his 1958 book, Uniting Europe, 17 years later published a second book in which he stated, actually it's not working. We should abandon it, and that was in 1975. It's still being pursued today. And the fourth one that needs to be done is that the European Union's leaders need to acknowledge that there is a significant emotional power in Europe today of active hostility to the European project. So it can be saved if these 4 things are done. The problem is that these are rather vague strategies. And the second problem is who's going to do that? If the technocrats in Brussels start implementing these, it's going to appear like another series of diktats. Yeah. If an elected politician, such as Angela Merkel or Francois Hollande, if they try to implement these, they'll be committing political suicide as they'll lose votes.
None of them are up to that kind of task. None of them have the credibility. There is no European political leadership that people have sufficient credibility in.
There is a European leadership, but they lack credibility.
Totally. They absolutely lack credibility, just like the British political leadership does. But I must say, you've made a better case for the European Union than I've heard for quite some time. Dr. Russell Foster, thanks for joining us on board the Sputnik. Coming up after the break, weaponized humour from South London. Another great up-and-coming black comedy talent joins us. Don't miss it. Welcome back to Sputnik. We like people who weaponize humour in the cause of peace, justice and equality, as long as they're funny.
It is an amazingly powerful weapon. If a picture paints 1,000 words, a joke can travel even further than that.
Our next guest has travelled only from South London, but he's going far, I can tell you. He's just been commissioned by BBC Three for a new series called Sunny D. He's Dane Baptiste, and he's with us now. Dane, thanks for coming on the Sputnik. First of all, congratulations on your commission. Tell us what the sitcom is about.
The sitcom is basically a semi-autobiographical look at my life before I started doing stand-up comedy, and it kind of deals with some of the frustrations I had with working a dead-end job, and tries to capture, I guess, what's the quarter-life crisis for a lot of people of my generation who were kind of given the promise of being able to go to university and pursue a higher education, and now find themselves unable to realise any kind of professional fulfilment. Or industrial fulfillment, and also just some of the basics of just being able to afford a home. So it kind of, the planes of reality are between like the work and then the home life, and then just the things I try and do to escape. So there's a lot of like cut scenes, a lot of fancy scenes about how I would imagine my ideal life, and it's just how working towards how I can achieve that with hilarious results.
Did you write it?
I did.
As well as perform?
Yes.
All of it? You wrote everything?
I did, yes.
Did you?
Fantastic.
Amazing.
You're a very talented guy. I saw you were telling me he's just won a...
Well, I think you were nominated as one of the first best newcomers.
Yes, so yeah. I was nominated for Best Newcomer in 2014 at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and transpired The Guardian picked up that I'm the first Black Briton to be nominated so far, which was an additional acclaim which I was very happy to embrace, which I hope is the catalyst for more creatives of colour to go to the festival and
Well, there's not many black people around the Edinburgh Festival, not many working class people. I grew up just a few miles away, and I was a grown man of well into my 30s before I ever crossed the threshold of the Edinburgh Festival. So you're obviously going places. Did you have to go looking for the BBC, or did they come looking for you?
There's a mixture of both. So I guess I had initially some performances to get visibility in front of the BBC, and then with my debut show, they came and BBC Commissioner Shane Allen came to watch the show and asked me if I had a treatment that I could submit for the BBC Comedy Feeds, which is a scheme they have which allows new and undiscovered talent to to have some experimental projects on the BBC, and from there that kind of precipitated into the series being commissioned. So I would say, as far as the BBC, over the last 2 to 3 years, they've been very instrumental in helping me develop my talent and working closely with me. So, yeah, they've been actually quite good in kind of seeking me out. So it's been great.
You've also been across the water in the United States. Were you performing there?
Yeah, I went to the States a few years ago before I did the debut show. I did a few gigs there as well, just to gauge how my material would be received, and it was good. And I'm hoping to continue to do that a lot more as well, because I've been largely influenced by a lot of US comics and US
Which
narrative.
ones? Tell me.
I would say some Bill Burr, Chris Rock, Eddie Griffin, George Carlin. Bruce as well. So just Dick Gregory would probably be one of my biggest influences. I just think some of the work he's done so far as comedy and his level of social activism is awe-inspiring.
Do you see a different response? Is there like a different culture and attitude towards this industry in which you work as a black artist?
There is to an extent. I'd say in the UK, it's very different in terms of just in the same way, I guess there's the social difference. So in the States, where there's the narrative about race relations seems to be a lot easier because people are aware and they accept that race is woven into the social fabric of the States, whereas the
Brits are in denial to some extent?
I'd say there is a lot of denial there. I think a lot of people, there is the general idea that class breeds more than race in the UK. However, I would argue that maybe mostly a post-war Windrush generation that would have been from the Caribbean or from West Africa or former British colonies in Africa would have come to the UK and been a part of the working class, and then therefore would have dealt with discrimination on two fronts, whether it be on a class or a race-based one.
Is there any crossover difficulty? I mean, do you find it, I suppose if I put it crudely, do you find it easier to make black people laugh or white people laugh, or is it exactly the same?
No, it's a fair question. I'd say it's exactly the same. I think with any group, you have to deal with most people. If you speak to them individually, you can be quite rational and you can identify or find a mutuality with somebody, whereas sometimes when groups get together, they can form a mob mentality, so that can be a lot harder to penetrate. And then I'd say that they're equal in that there are, so far as the spectrum of topics you can discuss on stage, there are some taboos for predominantly black audiences and then some taboos for predominantly white audiences. So I'd say creatively, you just have to hold the mirror of humanity up to people and just deal with it in that way. So they're challenging for different reasons.
Yeah. And is it the same in the United States? You're absolutely right that everybody in the United States knows that race is the elephant, not just in the room, but sitting on the sofa next to you.
Well, I mean, the elephant is the symbol for along their bipartisan system anyway. So
well, I'm glad you got your trips into the United States, because who knows whether if President Trump might let you in, or President Clinton, for that matter.
Knows? Yeah,
who knows that we'll want to go to the United States under either of them. But the United States right now looks like it's on the cusp of almost generalized racial warfare. Hardly a day goes by without an incident. Because of the technology we have now, hardly an incident isn't filmed. And once distributed, new incidents and new levels of aggro follow. Under a black president, we've got more black kids in prison than we do in university. We've got Bill Clinton's policy of 3 strikes and you're out, leading to a situation where a small nation, not quite small nation, of black people are in prison in America. and black people are beginning to fight back.
Yeah.
In some cases, literally
Yeah.
fight back. None of that's very funny, but you've got to be an observer of that and find the humour within it. There's a task for you. Go on.
Yeah, no, but it's a good task. I mean, the thing is, you know, the saying is, it's one of two things, that comedy is tragedy plus timing, and then also the other...
That's a good quote. What is that? Tragedy plus timing.
Yeah.
That's a very good quote.
Yeah, and also the fact that if you don't laugh, you cry. And I think one of the reasons why you've seen a lot of some of the more prominent or prolific comics, either coming from either a Jewish or black background, is that this is how people rationalise what they perceive as historical discrimination, is by using humour. And I think, especially for the black community I'm aware of, is that humour has always been a great way of, I guess, mitigating the the conflict you deal with when you feel that you're being discriminated against, or you're generally hated by a government, or as the system's oppressing you. I guess that's how you kind of rationalise it. And it can be very difficult, but I think it's probably one of the better ways in dealing with it. You know, laughter is one of the best medicine, and yeah, it's a great way of self-medicating.
It's a great medicine. Now, you grew up black and working class in South London, and now you've made it onto the BBC. How do your peers look at that? With envy, bit of jealousy, pride, mixture of all?
I would say for the larger, it's more pride and support. I think that's been one of the best things about working in this industry, is that most of my peers and contemporaries have been supportive. There's a very strong sense of fraternity amongst a lot of my peers in terms of, and that's because I guess people look at it as that if he's doing it, therefore it can be done. So people have been very supportive in that respect. So far as envy, I don't think it's necessarily a thing that's predisposed to like my black peers. I think comedy is a solitary art form. So sometimes people feel if I'm not on that stage, then it means I've lost out, and that's not always necessarily the case. So
a few weeks ago we had Ava sitting where you were sat.
With her baby.
With her baby,
yes,
first time.
Yeah.
And you worked with her before, she has been very active with the Corbyn movement,
yes.
And understand yourself as well. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, recently I performed at a fundraiser for Jeremy Corbyn, which on the same day was revealed that he'd be able to appear again on the ballot as well for leadership of the Labour Party. Oh, yeah. So yeah, it ended up going from potentially tense night to a very jovial one. Yeah. So yeah, it was great, and it's wonderful working with people who are intelligent and as politically active as Ava. Jeremy Hardy is also a comic who's also very clued up and very helpful, and obviously giving me a lot more knowledge in terms of I guess performing for the left, and kind of understanding a lot more about how to apply a socialist paradigm to my comedy as well.
In the milieu now that you travel amongst comedians, amongst people in the comedy industry, how would you calibrate their politics? You see, in the 80s, almost all comics were left-wing, anti-Thatcher.
Yes.
Some of them went on to become multimillionaires and turned into Tories themselves.
Yeah.
But it was the zeitgeist.
Yes.
Is it now?
I would say the majority, yes. But then I think a lot of people that do make declarations about their political leanings, I think they care more about, their disposition.
About the world.
And the world, yeah, more than their careers.
Well, look, Dane, we really look forward to the series. When does it start?
The series will be out in autumn. I haven't got a confirmed date, but people should pay attention around October time, we're saying. So just giving people time to enjoy their summer first, and then
enjoy an autumn with you.
Enjoy an autumn. But
Sunny D with Dane Baptiste on BBC Three. Thanks very much for coming on board the Sputnik. And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
So, from Italy to Greece, France and Netherlands, economic and social crisis worsening. What is this the end of the EU? Edmond Dante says the EU project was a disaster. Unelected elites stealing our sovereignty. Good by NWO.
Well, the doctor made the point that the only way that the EU can be saved was his 4-point programme, none of which has any possibility of being achieved. So I think in his heart, he and the rest of the Eurocrats know that its day has gone and its demise is coming.
Well, that's all the tweets that we have for today.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
You can stay in touch with us, though, on Twitter at @RT_Sputnik or on Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.